Ultra-processed foods have taken over America, and they're often less than healthy. So let's find out how to spot them in our next grocery visit.
Ultra-processed foods make up more than half of the calories that Americans consume, but they're actually quite dangerous for your health and potentially highly addictive. And I'm not just talking about donuts and pizza here.
The fact that half the food that we intake is highly processed is a bit alarming.
There are actually a lot of ultra-processed foods that we mistake for healthy ones. I'm Mia DeGraaf, I'm a health editor at Business Insider, and I'm going to be showing you how to tell what's an ultra-processed food from what isn't.
Just because food is something we need every day doesn't mean we can't get addicted to it. So thank you, Mia DeGraaf, for helping us discern the difference.
Processed food is something that has been altered in some way before it lands in your grocery cart. So that's canned tomatoes or cheese or dried pasta.
In our modern time, processed food makes sense to a certain extent. We can't always have what's available right then and there, so it's preserved and picked fresh and then canned or frozen and sent to us. So there's benefits to that, but the studies show that having a diet of whole foods that are fresh is better for you all around. With the whole foods diet being a staple of health, let's see how foods ravaged by machines have an impact on our health.
Ultra-processed food is something that looks very unlike anything you would have in your kitchen at home. It's had different ingredients added to it to make it more shelf-stable, so those might be preservatives or sugar. It's also gone through different processes like hydrogenation, which also help it last longer. That's things like soda or candy bars or chips.
And I know that ultra-processed food is super duper good. Like, who doesn't like donuts and candy and potato chips? But at the same time, it's the thing that strays the farthest from whole foods, especially with all the chemicals added to it to preserve it.
So the problem with ultra-processed foods on a nutritional level is that the processes that they go through break down what's known as the food matrix within the food. So the nutrients that are in the original food have gone through so many things that mean that they've deteriorated.
The matrix has us trapped, man. The food matrix.
So if I'm at home, I slice up a potato and I fry it and turn it into chips. The food matrix within that chip is going to be far more intact than if I buy a packet of chips. Those chips have gone through so many different processes and have different chemicals that make them more shelf stable, make them last longer. As a result, they're lacking in the nutrients inside.
I know it's a little bit extra work to make these things at home, like chips or donuts or even candy, but having that food matrix intact seems like a good option, especially if you're concerned about your health. But let's see what else she has to say about it.
One of the biggest issues with ultra-processed food is the lack of fiber. When you have a good amount of fiber in your body naturally produces this hormone called GLP-1. That is the hormone that weight loss drugs like Ozempic try to mimic. They are literally called GLP-1 agonists. So when you're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods and you are lacking in that fiber, that's going to disrupt your body's natural cycle of producing this hormone that keeps you fuller for longer and makes you not want to snack as much.
So it seems like these GLP-1 agonists that seem to be the magical weight loss drug are because we're taking that GLP-1 out of our diet. We're taking that fiber out of our diet, which is healthy. It's healthy to have fiber. It regulates your bowel movements. We have an obesity epidemic for many reasons, but one of them is taking fiber out of our diet with these ultra-processed foods. And now we're using this miracle drug, Ozempic, to put it back in. Seems like a backward solution if you ask me. A solution to a problem that we created.
That's why ultra-processed foods are linked with diabetes and heart disease and obesity. A study in 2019 by the National Institute of Health provided a bit of a watershed moment in terms of our understanding of ultra-processed foods. So they had some people eating whole foods, some people eating ultra-processed foods. They matched it perfectly for carbohydrates, fiber, sugars, everything, and you could eat as much as you wanted. At the end of the study, they found that the people on the ultra-processed food had eaten 500 calories more a day than the people eating whole foods. That is, I cannot emphasize enough, a huge finding. And it led the researchers to find that ultra-processed foods do seem to incentivize you to eat more.
Life is all about incentives. Money incentives, food incentives, social, emotional, and mental incentives. The incentive to get you addicted to ultra processed foods is definitely there with money and big business, especially since they're so easy to grab off the shelf instead of cooking whole foods yourself. Your health is worth so much more than a little bit extra time and money saved.
Other studies have found that ultra-processed foods may be linked to anxiety and depression and sleep problems. But the reality is you can't cut these foods out. If you speak to a nutritionist, they will tell you that they eat ultra-processed foods too. They're unavoidable, but the key is thinking about eating them in moderation.
Less depression and anxiety would benefit our culture all around. Like everything in life, it's all about moderation. I'm not saying you have to have whole foods all the time. You can if you want. A good mix tending towards whole foods will make everybody healthier, mentally and physically.
So here are some foods that we often mistake for healthy, but they're actually ultra-processed. So let's start with juice. It has vitamin C, antioxidants, polyphenols, these things which are all good for your heart and for your body. But the problem with juice is that it is ultra-processed and it's really lacking in fiber. Once you've juiced, say, an orange, you're losing all of those fibrous materials that would be fortifying your body, and you're just extracting the sugars. So you're getting a ton of glucose and a ton of sugar, and then that can cause your blood sugar to spike. If you're looking for a healthy alternative to juice, fruit is really your best option. That's where you're getting the original source of nutrients. But above all, just drink it in moderation.
So juice is okay sometimes, but fruit is juicy in itself. I personally always choose to have fruit for breakfast because it jumpstarts your digestive system because it has all that water along with the fiber. And I just love fruit.
Next is granola bars. Granola bars are considered healthy because they're often made with oats and nuts and dried fruit and seeds. These are all things which are really good for your heart and sometimes also good for your digestion. The problem with granola bars is that they're often made with a ton of sugar. If you look on the back of a granola bar label, very often they'll contain more than 15 grams of sugar. That's 4 teaspoons. So if you're going to eat a granola bar, what I would recommend is to look on the label and check that there is at least 3 grams of fiber, at least 5 grams of protein, and less than 10 grams of sugar.
We often forget, but sugar is highly processed. Sugar in the form that we have it today is not found in nature. We create it through sugar cane, through sugar beets, in multi-step processes. Sugar is hard to avoid, so like before, everything in moderation. But the less sugar, the better. Homemade is always better because you know exactly what's going into it.
Another one is sports drinks like Gatorade. The idea is that after a workout, or if you're sick, you're just thirsty for whatever reason, that you would drink, say, a Gatorade, and it contains so many electrolytes that it will replenish the sodium in the water that you've lost. The reason they're unfortunately not as healthy as we think is that these drinks often contain more sugar, other sweeteners, and food coloring than anything else in the bottle. It also contains dextrose, which is a sugar substitute, which is linked to increased risk of diabetes and obesity. If you're not an athlete or if you're not dripping with sweat after your workout, you probably don't need these drinks. So drinking water and eating a nutritious meal is going to get you that same hydration.
For electrolytes, you can also add a little bit of salt to your water. And a good alternative pre-workout is a little bit of honey and a little bit of salt.
Moving on, we have gluten-free foods. The issue with gluten-free food is that, again, these are highly processed foods. They often replace gluten with starchy ingredients like tapioca starch and rice flour and cornstarch, which can raise your blood sugar really fast. If you don't have a gluten sensitivity or you don't have celiac disease, there is no reason for you to avoid gluten. If you're going to buy gluten-free foods, Just look at the label and make a decision about how you want to consume it. Look at how much sugar is in there, what kinds of sugar, what kinds of starch, and then make a decision about what else you're going to eat with that gluten-free item. That might help you to balance out the sugars and those types of starch that are in that ingredient.
Gluten is naturally forming, so if you don't have a sensitivity, like she said, best not to avoid it. I think a lot of the sensitivity comes from the heavy amounts of glyphosate, which is a chemical put on foods, but I don't know. You have to look into that yourself.
Cold cuts, like deli meats, are also ultra processed. Throw them in a sandwich, that's a high dose of protein and zinc and iron, but they are also very high in saturated fats and sodium. In 2015, the WHO classified ultra-processed meat as carcinogenic. That includes cold cuts. When you manufacture ultra-processed meat, they inject a chemical called nitrites or nitrates to make it last longer and be more stable. In your body, that converts into something called NOC, and that can damage the DNA and the cells in your bowel, which can increase your risk of colorectal cancer.
So I don't know about you, but I love sandwiches. But it seems like with everything, moderation is key. Whole foods like cooking your own meat is the way to go most of the time. Just remember, a little bit of extra effort is going to help your health in the long term.
So another food that's ultra processed is plant-based meat replacements. One of the benefits is that they cut out a kind of chemical that's naturally occurring in something like red meat called hyaline, which can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. Just because something is plant-based, it can still be unhealthy. Sugar, for example, is plant-based. The other thing is that with a lot of these foods, they inject a lot of sodium to replicate the flavor. So often they're very high in salt.
Now, this is a huge myth. Everybody thinks that plant-based and vegan foods are so much healthier for you, but oftentimes they're the ones that are the most highly processed. All these fake cheeses and fake meats, they have to go through intense mechanical processes to become like that. So like I said before, if you want to eat more fruits and vegetables, Whole Foods is the way to go.
So here's how to decide whether you should buy an ultra-processed food or not. Read the label. Something that nutrition experts do is they follow the 5-20 rule. So that's less than 5% of a bad thing, more than 20% of a good thing. You're looking for more fiber, less sodium, less added sugars. Try to look at if there are chemicals that you don't recognize. And be wary of buzzwords. For example, something that says it's made with real fruit or made with real vegetables. It might be majority sugars, but with a dusting of fruit or vegetable on top. Also, there is a difference between certified naturally grown, which is a regulated term, and naturally grown. If something says it's naturally grown, that doesn't mean anything. The term organic, there are many benefits to organic foods, but just because something's organic doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. Organic sugar in a candy bar doesn't make that candy bar healthy. And then lastly, just because something's natural, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. The terms natural and healthy, they are not regulated.
So look for more whole foods and less processed things in the ingredients. Skip over things that you can't pronounce or you don't know what they are. Most importantly, don't fall for all the marketing tactics that they use to get you to buy these processed foods. Just use your discernment, and if it's too good to be true, it probably is. If it doesn't look like something that's found in nature, it's probably not, and probably far from it.
These buzzwords are carefully designed. They're part of a big marketing strategy for food companies. Food companies spend on average, $7.5 billion a year advertising their products in the US. That's $440 million every single month. To put that in context, that is like making Avatar: The Way of Water, which is the highest budget movie ever made, once a month, every month for the whole year.
With the marketing budget being so massive, there's no doubt that they're using your psychology against you to get you addicted to these foods, to get you to spend more money, because that's what they want. They want money. These big businesses don't care about health, they care about profits. So they use salt, sugar, sweet, and fat to get you addicted. It just takes a little bit of strength, willpower, determination, and discernment to do your part to get past these marketing tricks. And that's what they are. They're just tricks, but they're very good tricks that they spend a lot of money on.
So why are companies ultra processing products? First of all, it's cheaper. You could replace butter with something like palm oil, sugar with something like corn syrup. The other reason is that government interventions have made it really easy to make ultra processed foods and a little harder to scale up if you're a small business or a farm.
The companies are just trying to cut their bottom dollar. They're trying to produce their product for as cheap as possible. And the problem is the government incentivizes this cost-cutting method.
The government subsidizes corporations that produce ultra-processed food, while private farms have to be privately run.
Since the war times, the government has incentivized big business and kind of left smaller businesses and small farms to the wayside.
There might be a change coming in terms of how we're eating ultra-processed foods in the US. In 2025, the US government will be issuing new dietary guidance. They do this every 5 years. And ahead of that, they're conducting a pretty wide-ranging study right now, looking at the chemicals used in ultra-processed foods. Big companies are watching this study and they're pretty nervous about it. Depending on the findings, it may impact what Americans are told to eat. If Americans swapped one ultra-processed food item from their meals every single day, food companies' profits would drop by about 7% on average, which is really significant. If we just carried on doing that and started eating like Mediterraneans all the time, these food companies would probably fold.
The Mediterranean diet has the longest life expectancy on Earth. They're called the blue zones if you want to look into it. Life is all about incentives. We need the incentives to benefit the power of the people, not the people in power.
Okay, I know I'm doing Gatorade and I actually want a sip of it right now. I just saw it on my thing and I was like,
But all this knowledge doesn't negate the fact that ultra-processed foods are super tasty because that's exactly what they were made for. So if you like this and you want more of this type of content, hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.